Phoenix is, it says free-spirited on this bio, but I'd like to edit that. Phoenix is the most free-spirited person I've ever met. I know, oh, I'm a free spirit. No, you're not. She is. She is very free-spirited. She is a psychonautical futurist, creator, artist, lover, educator, consultant, coach, philosopher, global traveler, passionately inspired by individual empowerment, harmonious interpersonal dynamics, community building, authentic relating, and tech-forward ecological solutions. Well, yes. These passions intersect in areas of social permaculture and relationship anarchy, entheogenic exploration and harm reduction, natural wellness, anarchical pacifism, and decentralization. Decentralization. Mind hacking and practical magic, broader permaculture and sustainable food systems, economics and cryptocurrency, Taoism, virtual reality, and innovation, all with the vision of moving into a more harmonious, sustainable future. Now, you should all know that Phoenix wrote a little guide called The Tripper's Guide to an Awesome Ride. I'm the idiot that forgot them at my house. They will be available tomorrow. They're free. She also has a card at the merch table that has my books. If you pick this card up and scan this with your phone, you can get a PDF copy of A Tripper's Guide.
Sweet!
Yeah. She's awesome. She's the best. So please, I need some very loud clapping, cheers, and hollops and all that for my very, very good friend, Phoenix!
Once upon a time, on my 28th birthday, about 5 years ago, I embarked on a lysergic journey that turned my reality inside out. It was about 5 months after my very first psychedelic experience, one in which I caught a glimpse of what was possible to explore with this amazing compound. And for 5 months, I compiled a list of my most pressing existential questions to explore on the next trip. Things like, why am I here? What happens after death? Is God real? Little did I know that attempting to answer all of my existential questions in one trip would prove to be the most overwhelming experience of my life. But on the day that I later came to refer to as my rebirth day, I took a deep dive into the why of it all. My journey gradually disintegrated everything I thought I knew and believed about reality. As I peeled back veil after veil, I could see how all of the belief systems that were underlying my perceptions and experiences were constructs, but not just constructs, changeable constructs, and not just changeable, but actually ever-changing, mirage-like illusions. As I peeled back the final veil, I found myself, or rather lost myself, in the middle. But that is a grander story for another time. As I became I again, returning to my matter-based human form, I was acutely aware of the subjectivity and malleability of my previously held beliefs, especially around presumptions of what was important and ideas of security. This radically destabilized me, or as a previous presenter and Stan Groff termed it, I experienced a state of spiritual emergency. And I felt as though I was in a state of shock and lost for about a year. The most difficult part was that I had always identified as a seeker. But on that one trip, I had gone and found all the most important things I had ever sought for. And suddenly, I was left with nothing meaningful to do. My coping mechanism was to lose myself in fiction for the better part of that year, because there was still some element of mystery that I could seek out in good fiction. But despite my shock and my desire to forget everything that I learned and experienced from that trip, I also emerged with some profound and ultimately helpful insights. One of these was my characterization of God, or source energy, as all that is. There is nothing separate from it, nothing that is not it. And though we perceive each other to be separate beings, we are really more like fingers on a hand. So fingers aren't separate from a hand, they're very much a part of what makes up a hand. But yet each finger is distinctly unique. Likewise, each human entity and manifestation in general is totally unique and distinctly different, but not separate. In response to the question, what is the point of all this? I got the answer, to experience. What else is there to do with infinite time and possibilities? So, if the purpose is unique experience, several things follow. 1, experience can only emerge if there's contrast. So, beyond the first veils, there's duality, dichotomy, through which will can project itself to experience infinite fractaling possibilities. 2, from this, there is no objective right or wrong. 3, therefore, there are no objective shoulds. This was a really tough one for me, but in order to actually start living in alignment with this new understanding, I endeavored to eliminate the word should from my vocabulary, which was a lot easier said than done. I struggled with it so much that I actually asked my partner at the time if he would help me out by slapping me hard across the face every time he heard me say the word should, which he was not so keen to do at first, but reluctantly agreed to do. And so for a couple of months, unfortunately, I got slapped in the face a lot. Even not at restaurants or shopping at the farmer's market, it kind of happened all the time. But thankfully, after a couple of months, it cured me. So I began to question what it was that I most wanted to experience in this amazing, miraculous lifetime. And what came to me was that I really wanted true, deep, rich, meaningful, authentic love. So I started evaluating all of my previous relationships with family, friends, and romantic partners through this new lens. I could see more clearly now where all the blocks had been to this deep love that I really yearned for. So I started playing with some philosophical axioms to kind of practice as mantras as I set out to repair, regenerate, and forge new relationships. You want to know what some of them are?
Yeah.
1, my experience is the only one that I, as in my ego, can truly know. 2, even if you tried to tell me everything about your life and why you see things the way you do, I could still only comprehend a tiny fraction of it, and it still would only be through my lens. 3, I can't know all the reasons why you make certain decisions. Therefore, it's rather absurd to take it personally or stand in judgment of it. 4, I can't imagine what passions or curiosities might call to you, now or in the future. But I'm excited for you to discover and follow them, just like I'm excited to discover and follow my own. I can't fully understand your subconscious fears and traumas, but I know you've got some that might even affect you in ways you're not aware of. And I want to know and love if I want to know and love the fullness of you, I will need to accept and embrace them too. 6, I can't possibly predict what could be right or best for you or even for me. 7, ultimately the experience of the other will always be a rich mystery worthy of the deepest curiosity. From my own experience, I discovered far more agency than I previously realized I had. The most important being, I realized that no one can make me feel a certain way. For example, you might want to make me mad, you might try to make me mad, but it's still ultimately up to me if I get mad or not. So after a year of attempting to distract myself with fiction and utterly failing to forget my life-changing acid trip, I finally began consciously integrating some of the insights I had had. I started with a list of what I deemed to be noxious emotions. At the top of that list was jealousy. Jealousy had plagued me significantly in my life, like leading to panic attacks, and, as you might imagine, had caused major disruptions and challenges in each of the 6 longer-term monogamous relationships I had had through my late teens and 20s. I felt as though it really hadn't helped me at any point, and I deeply pondered its function. As I rationally thought through the insights I had, it seemed reasonable to me that since this emotional reaction took place in my body and in my brain, and since I'm the only one that seems to be in control of my body and my brain, that I could therefore consciously reprogram this response. So I ran through several thought experiments, but I really couldn't be sure it worked until I had some way to really test it. So I decided to try another radical experiment. I asked my monogamous partner if he would consider having sex with someone else and then telling me all the details, because at that moment, that was the biggest jealousy trigger I could think of. And a week later, he did it. So, I sat across from him on the couch as he sheepishly began his confession. And just as I had hoped, jealousy rose up in my body like an inferno. I held up my hand to ask him to pause, I closed my eyes, and I attempted to characterize the feeling. The image that emerged was a fierce, terrifying banshee woman with flaming hair and guns blazing, prepared to take hold of all of my faculties and explode at the brave but terrified partner sitting across from me. But I remembered that she was a construct, one which I could reconstruct. So in my mind's eye, I imagined opening my arms to her and offering her a hug. She seemed confused, but she accepted it. And then I thanked her, because I realized that I had evolved this response as a protection mechanism. So I said, "Thank you for always trying to protect me. But in this case, I don't need your protection, because I created this scenario intentionally." And then, taking her under my arm, I asked her if she would lend her energy to a different feeling and response, compersion, which is the opposite of jealousy, or the joy in someone else's joy. At first, this didn't seem natural, but as she settled into this, I asked my partner for more details, again and again, until all I felt was joy. I did 3 or 4 similar tests over the next couple of months, and I'm rather amazed to say that 4 years later, I have not experienced the feeling of being overtaken by jealousy. Once I realized how empowering this was, I decided to embark on another radical experiment, what I now refer to as my 5-month radical acceptance phase, but that is a grander story for another time. I concluded, though, that acceptance for me was the most powerful form of love. So, in the aftermath of my jealousy reprogramming experiments, I explored and deconstructed a lot of the programming that I had around monogamy, fidelity, exclusivity, and the heaps of cultural baggage attached to these ideas. When I reduced it down to its simplest terms, I realized that if I truly desire happiness, wellness, and that deep love for myself and for others, I must cultivate and encourage freedom to act authentically. In other words, all of this boiled down to honoring autonomy or sovereignty and cultivating consciousness and personal responsibility. In order to do this well, I realized a couple of things must happen. 1, I must strive to eliminate assumptions I have about people and I have about relationships. 2, I must strive to reduce my expectations, to remember that I know virtually nothing about another person or about the future, and that I must create and hold space for any authentic possibility to arise. Even when others try to give me expectations, I don't have to take them. When people make me promises, I can release them. Ultimately, it's my responsibility for what expectations, and therefore what disappointments, I have. 3, I am entitled to nothing. I can ask without the expectation of receiving what I want, and anything that anyone offers me is a gift, for which the appropriate response, in my opinion, is gratitude. 4, respecting autonomy means getting clear, ongoing, informed consent, and remembering that just because something happened one way one time does not mean that I can expect it to happen that way again. 5, The only constant is change. We cannot know the future, and boundaries, circumstances, priorities, and preferences all continuously flux over time. 6. To really embrace this truth about change, I also came to the hard realization that all contracts and promises are breakable and non-binding. And though I've been taught to seek security in them, that sense of security is mostly illusory. Also, ironically, oftentimes, obligations, especially to not change, lead to some combination of resentment, rebellion, repression, and resignation. Things that I felt were counter to the deep love that I wanted to cultivate. I realized, though, that I don't have to create breakable contracts or rules in my relationships. In fact, most of my friendships never had any. Instead, there's an opportunity to focus on cultivating the culture that I want and connecting where there is authentic overlap and synergy. So within a few months of arriving at these conclusions around how I want to consciously and authentically relate to others, I stumbled upon the words relationship anarchy on somebody's OkCupid profile. I had a little bit of background studying anarchism, which, by the way, simply means no rulers, no dictators, no masters. So I was curious and I began investigating. I discovered that this philosophy of relationship anarchy, which was first described in Sweden in the early 2000s by a woman named Andy Nordgren, was largely in alignment with my acid trip insights. Excited that others were discussing it and finding community around it, studying it quickly became a new passion, and I have spent nearly every day since talking about it, reading about it, writing about it, teaching about it, living it, and loving it. Today, I cannot fathom living any other way. So what exactly is relationship anarchy? Here are a couple of definitions that I have come up with over the years. A philosophy and practice grounded in respect for autonomy, authentic co-willing, voluntary engagement, and anti-authoritarianism. It calls into question the conventional social norms, beliefs, and customs around relationships, including the notions of ownership, scarcity, and entitlement, allowing for conscious alignment of intentions with those we choose to relate to. Relationship anarchy transcends polyamory and romantic and sexual relationships in general to include all of our interpersonal relationships. Another definition, a way of consciously approaching relationships that question social norms, expectations, assumptions, rules, and obligations, and is more grounded in respect for autonomy, authentic co-willing, and voluntary engagement. And a third one, a relating philosophy and practice based in self-awareness and personal responsibility that honors autonomy, authenticity, and adaptability. It is a practice of consciously aligning intentions with others, rather than unconsciously projecting assumptions and abiding by societal expectations. A few final comments on relationship anarchy. It's so much more than like another new trendy form of polyamory. In fact, it's not exactly synonymous with non-monogamy. So people who practice relationship anarchy might actually prefer to be in a sexually exclusive relationship. The main difference is that it's a choice that one makes for oneself, not for the other person in that dynamic. The other person is always at liberty to make their own choice. But if two people both make their own choice to be sexually exclusive with each other, it looks like a functionally monogamous relationship, but it still might be grounded in this other intention. Essentially, relationship anarchy is about exploring our relationship to relationship, questioning how much is authentic versus conditioned, and where do our expectations about relationships actually come from, and do we want to give that source, whatever it is, authority? So if any of this is striking a chord for you and you'd like to learn more about the theory and practice of relationship anarchy and you're local, I have a meetup group. It's called Relationship Anarchy Portland on meetup.com. And I don't have anything scheduled right now because I'm traveling a lot, but I'm going to try to get 3 or 4 events a month going starting in this fall, including discussion groups, talks, workshops, and maybe some other speakers. I'm also hopefully relatively close now to publishing my book, whose working title is Relationship Anarchy, Liberating Love. If you're interested in updates on that, you can sign up with your email on my website, which is www.liberating.love. Or there's a clipboard on the table by the entrance there where you can write down your email. I also offer coaching services and will be open to taking a couple of new clients starting in October. You can contact me through the website if you're interested. I also have, my main website is phoenixenterprising.com, and you'll find all of the axioms and philosophical pillars that I outlined in this talk on that website. So if you want to review them, they're not really in the same order, but they're all there. And then just another quick comment about the Tripper's Guide. So this is like the size of the book. I wrote it to be a very easy to access and quick to read resource before any psychedelic experience. It's now about 4 years old, and I wrote it because I really wanted to introduce my little brother to LSD, but I did not want to put him in a state of spiritual emergency for a year like I did. And so I began a research project of trying to find all of the best practices I could for preparing for a safe, therapeutic, psychedelic experience that one can look back on with positivity. And this has now gone all over the world. I've distributed over 15,000 copies, and I've gotten tons of feedback from some of the wisest and brightest figures in this scene, in my opinion. And so it's on version 5 now. I always solicit feedback, so if you get a copy and you read it and you have something you want to suggest, there's an email address you can email in the Tripper's Guide to let me know, and it'll probably go in version 6. Also, we just heard about Bitcoin from one of our earlier speakers, and if that's something you're interested in exploring and you're local, I just wanted to offer that I also teach a free Bitcoin 101 class every first Monday right down the block at Flying Pie Pizza. And in general, there are a lot of free Bitcoin meetups happening pretty much every week somewhere in the greater Portland area, and you can find that on meetup.com. And feel free to ask me. I have lots of other resources. You can also find those on my website, phoenixenterprising.com. Thank you. I'm also a visual artist and love creating trippy, psychedelic, largely digital photo art, and you can find that on my website as well, including all kinds of fun things for sale through Society 6. So that's it. I don't think there's any time for questions. Thank you.
Right.